I want to tell you a story that still haunts me to this day. 3 years ago, I came across an article in the local paper about an accident in a suburb of Denver. Just a routine chronicle of the accident, a few lines. But something compelled me to dig deeper. What I discovered changed my perception of how thin the line between infatuation and tragedy is. This story is about a man who loved snakes more than life, and how that love ultimately destroyed him. Mark Henderson worked as a programmer for a small IT company. 34 years old, single, rented an apartment in a quiet neighborhood. Colleagues described him as reserved but friendly. He had few friends but one all-consuming hobby. Mark had been collecting snakes since he was a teenager. He started with the usual urchins and stripes, but gradually his interest shifted to more exotic species. In his apartment, there were 7 terrariums of different sizes, each equipped with the latest technology. His neighbors knew about his hobby and treated him with understanding. Mark never caused any problems, always paid his rent on time, and behaved quietly. The only thing that bothered them was the smell of special lamps and the constant humming of fans in his apartment. But no one knew that there was a special snake among his collection. The eastern green mamba is one of the most venomous snakes in the world. Mark bought it a year and a half ago from a private breeder who worked with zoos. The deal was semi-legal. The documents were executed with irregularities. Mamba lived in the largest terrarium, which Mark put in the bedroom. A glass structure measuring 2 by 1.5 meters, with a climate control system for $3,000. He called the snake Emerald because of its stunning green coloring. Studying medical records, I found out that a month before the tragedy, Mark went to the doctor complaining of headaches and trouble sleeping. The doctor had prescribed sleeping pills, but Mark had been taking them irregularly, fearing that the drug would affect his reaction when working with snakes. Colleagues noticed that Mark had become even more distracted in recent weeks. He was often late for work, which was uncharacteristic of him. He answered questions one syllable, and during his lunch break, he was constantly watching snake videos on his phone. 3 days before the incident, Mark posted in a specialized forum that Emerald was behaving aggressively. Experienced snake keepers advised him to check the temperature in the terrarium and the humidity level. Some warned that mambas are extremely sensitive to changes in the environment. That fateful evening, October 15th, Mark got home around 7 a.m. A downstairs neighbor remembers hearing his footsteps on the stairs. He ate a warmed-up pizza, which he had ordered the day before, and watched some video on his laptop. According to his internet provider, he turned off the router at 10:47 p.m. Mark usually checked all his snakes before going to bed. It was his daily tradition. He would take pictures of them on his phone and post the pictures on social media. That night, the last picture was taken at 11:12 p.m. It shows an empty emerald terrarium. I had a long conversation with a reptile expert who was helping the investigation. He explained to me that eastern green mambas are masters of escape. They are incredibly flexible and can squeeze into a crevice that seems too small for them. Even a microscopic looseness in a terrarium mount can be a path to freedom. Supposedly, Mark discovered the escape around 12:30 at night. On his phone, he found several missed calls to the emergency animal capture service, but there was no longer an on-call service at that time. The last outgoing call was made at 23:56. He was trying to call the breeder from whom he bought the mamba. What happened next, we can only speculate. Experts believe that Mark decided to find the snake on his own. He knew that mambas prefer high places and dark corners. Most likely, he methodically searched the apartment, checking every closet, every shelf. Emerald was found in the morning in the bedroom, curled up in a ball behind the radiator. The snake was calm and showed no aggression to the arriving specialist. Mark was found on the bed. According to the conclusion of medical examination, the bite came to the neck area, the poison got directly into the bloodstream. Death occurred within 20 minutes. The venom of the eastern green mamba affects the nervous system, causes paralysis of the respiratory muscles. Mark didn't even have time to call an ambulance. The phone was lying next to the bed, the screen was unlocked, but the number was not dialed. The neighbors hadn't heard anything, no screams, no struggle. Judging by the position of his body, Mark had just gotten into bed and fell asleep for good. He probably didn't even realize what had happened. A mamba bite is sometimes almost painless, like the prick of a fine needle. Mark's mother, whom I called a year after the tragedy, still blames herself. She told her son that snakes were dangerous, but he always replied that he followed all safety precautions. He loved those things so much, she told me through tears. He said they were beautiful, graceful. Mark's coworkers held a funeral fundraiser. His boss told me he couldn't believe what had happened for a long time. Mark was so careful, so thoughtful. He calculated every little detail of the job. How could he not foresee such a risk? It's a question that plagues many who knew Mark. The story made the local news but didn't resonate much. A short story on the evening program, a few articles on the internet. Journalists wrote about careless handling of dangerous animals, but no one tried to understand the man behind the tragedy. The rest of Mark's snakes were transferred to a zoo. Emerald now lives in a terrarium behind bulletproof glass, and thousands of visitors admire her beauty, unaware of her past. A sign next to the terrarium warns of danger, but to most people it's just a beautiful green snake. I often think of Mark, especially when I see programs about exotic animals. He wasn't a reckless extremist, he wasn't chasing adrenaline. He was an ordinary man who fell in love with the world of reptiles and overestimated his ability to control that world. I was able to see Mark's apartment 6 months after the tragedy. The new tenants had allowed me in, knowing of my investigation. The place looked perfectly normal, freshly renovated, new furniture. But in the bedroom, behind the radiator, I noticed faint scratches on the baseboard. The landlady told me that she could not rent out the apartment for a long time after the incident. People were afraid of bad energy, and when they learned the details, they refused. Only a young couple agreed to rent the apartment for half the market price, and even then after serious repairs. Studying Mark's correspondence on the internet, I discovered a whole community of people who are fascinated by venomous snakes. They call themselves venom keepers, from the English venom, poison. It's a closed world with its own rules, traditions, and unspoken hierarchy. In one of the forums, I found Mark's profile under the nickname Green Fang. He was quite an active member, sharing photos of his snakes, giving advice to newcomers. Reading his posts, I saw a passionate enthusiast who genuinely loved what he was doing. 2 months before the tragedy, Mark posted a video of emerald feeding. The comments under the video were enthusiastic. People marveled at the mamba's grace, speed, and beauty. No one warned of the danger. Everyone took it as a norm. I was particularly struck by a message Mark wrote a week before he died. He complained that Emerald had become restless, often crawling up to the glass of the terrarium as if studying the castle. "Must be missing the wildlife," he wrote. No one at the forum took this as a red flag. The veterinarian who maintained Mark's collection agreed to speak to me only on condition of anonymity. He said he had always warned about the dangers of keeping mambas at home, but Mark was confident in his abilities. He showed me special hooks for handling snakes, protective gloves, the doctor said. But I could see he was relaxed, used to it. This veterinarian shared an alarming statistic with me. 32 people have died from pet venomous snake bites in the United States in the last 10 years. Most of the victims are experienced snake handlers who have kept reptiles for years. Experience breeds complacency, he explained, and snakes don't forgive mistakes. I contacted the breeder who sold Mark the mamba. The conversation was difficult. The man clearly felt guilty about what had happened. He told me that Mark had impressed him as a knowledgeable buyer, asking the right questions, showing an understanding of the risks. I warned him that mambas are not toys, the breeder said. Showed a documentary about attack cases in Africa. Mark nodded, saying he understood. He already had 6 snakes. I thought he knew what he was doing. After the tragedy, the man stopped dealing in venomous species. Mark's brother, with whom he had little contact, came to sort through the deceased's belongings. He told me that as a child, Mark was afraid of even house cats, and bought his first snake at 17 as an act of protest against his own fears. He wanted to prove to himself that he could control what frightened others. In Mark's journal, which I was given permission to read, there is an entry from the last New Year's Eve. Emerald is the most beautiful creature I have ever seen. When it moves, time stops. It's like living next to a piece of art that could kill you. That phrase kept me awake for a long time. There was some morbid romanticization of danger in it, bordering on suicidal tendencies. Perhaps for Mark, risk was not a side effect of the hobby, but an integral part of it. A psychologist I consulted explained to me the phenomenon of Oediping, The need of some people to control something potentially deadly. It gives them a sense of power over life and death, she said. But sooner or later that control slips away. Mark's neighbor in the stairwell, an elderly woman, recalled him showing her pictures of his snakes on his phone. His eyes lit up when he talked about them, she said, like a man in love. I thought it was cute until I found out what happened. In the last month of his life, Mark often ordered takeout. The delivery men remembered him as a quiet customer who always tipped generously and apologized for the strange smell in the entryway. One of the delivery men said he sometimes heard hissing coming from Mark's apartment. The management company of the building hid the details of the tragedy from the other tenants for a long time, fearing panic. When the truth did come out, several families moved out. People were afraid that there might have been other snakes left somewhere, she explained. All the terrariums were checked several times, though. I found an EMT who was the first to arrive on the call. 20 years of experience, he'd seen all sorts of things, but this death was particularly memorable to him. The guy was lying so still like he was just sleeping, the medic told me. If it weren't for the bite mark on his neck, you'd think it was a natural death. The same medic told me about other cases he had encountered. Bites from pet venomous snakes, spiders, scorpions. People think exotic animals make them special, he said. But nature doesn't take kindly to those who overestimate their strength. On the Venom Keepers forum, Mark's death was discussed for weeks. Opinions were divided, with some blaming it on carelessness and others talking about a fatal coincidence. But no one questioned the very idea of keeping deadly snakes in an apartment. One of the forum participants, a man with 20 years of experience, wrote prophetic words. Sooner or later, it happens to all of us. It's not a question of if it happens, but when. Mark just didn't get sick of his snakes in time. 6 months later, the man himself was killed by a Gabon viper bite. I met with a herpetologist from a local university who has been studying snake behavior for 30 years. He has never kept venomous species at home, working with them only in laboratory conditions. Snakes are unpredictable by definition, he explained. They're not dogs or cats. They have no attachment to humans. This scientist showed me videos of mambas' behavior in the wild. Their speed is astounding, up to 20 kilometers per hour, lightning-fast dashes over a distance equal to their body length. In the terrarium, they seem calm, explained the herpetologist. But this is a deceptive impression. Instincts go nowhere. Studying medical protocols, I learned terrifying details about the effects of mamba venom. First, the victim feels a slight tingling sensation at the site of the bite. Then dizziness sets in. In 10 minutes, muscle paralysis sets in, and in another 10 minutes, respiratory arrest. The antidote is only effective in the first few minutes. At the hospital where Mark's body was brought, I was told that the antidote for the bite of the eastern green mamba was not in their possession. This is not a case we encounter in Colorado, explained the head of the toxicology department. The closest supply of serum was in San Diego at the zoo. Even if Mark had been able to call for help in time, his chances of survival were virtually non-existent. A helicopter with the antidote wouldn't reach Denver for more than 2 hours, and a man bitten by a mamba had much less time. It was a death with a delayed but inevitable execution. The insurance company had long refused to compensate Mark's mother. The policy had an extremely hazardous activities exclusion clause. The insurer's lawyers argued that keeping poisonous snakes fell into that category. The trial lasted 8 months. The family's attorney argued that Mark had taken every precaution and that his death was an accident and not the result of reckless behavior. The parties eventually reached a settlement agreement for an amount the family asked not to disclose. The owner of the pet store where Mark bought snake food remembered him as a regular customer. He came every week, took mice, rats, vitamins, the seller said. Never complained about the prices, although snakes are expensive. Spent more on them than most people spend on dogs. The same salesman told me about the growing popularity of exotic pets. Sales of terrarium equipment have tripled in recent years. People want something out of the ordinary, he explained. But few people realize the responsibility they're taking on. In Mark's apartment, investigators found a library of 200 books on snakes, magazines, and printouts of scientific articles. He really knew a lot about his pets, studied their behavior, physiology, peculiarities of keeping. But as it turned out, knowledge does not guarantee safety. One of the books in his collection was particularly shabby, a guide to first aid for poisonous snake bites. There were pencil notes in the margins, underlined phrases. Mark knew what to do in case of danger, but when the danger became a reality, there was no time to act. Colleagues at work said Mark sometimes brought mice for lunch that he hadn't had time to feed to the snakes the day before. He would defrost them in the microwave in the break room, recalled one of the programmers. We got used to it, but the newbies would get scared. Mark would explain that it was natural food. In his work computer, IT found a folder with thousands of pictures of snakes. Not just his own, but snapshots from the internet. Mambas, cobras, vipers from all over the world. The screensaver on his desktop was a close-up of a green mamba's head with its mouth open, showing off its poisonous teeth. The neighborhood policeman who handled the case admitted to me that it was one of the strangest deaths in his practice. Usually people are victims of circumstances, he said. And here, the man created those circumstances himself, increasing the risk year after year. Mark's last social media post was made the day before his death. A photo of all 7 terrariums with the caption, "My little paradise, coming home to this beauty every day." Below the post are dozens of likes and enthusiastic comments from like-minded people. Studying Mark's bank statements, I saw how much money he spent on his hobby. Over the last year, it's about $15,000 on equipment, feed, and veterinary services. That's more than half his salary as a computer programmer. Snakes weren't just a hobby, they were his raison d'etre. A senior manager of his company told me about a corporate party that took place a month before the tragedy. Colleagues asked Mark to talk about snakes, and he spoke for 2 hours straight, not noticing that the audience gradually dispersed. He lived the subject 24 hours a day. In his notebook, I found phone numbers for veterinarians, breeders, terrarium equipment dealers. But there was not a single emergency contact in case a venomous snake escaped. Mark had planned everything but the most important thing: what to do if something went wrong. An EMT who was involved in inspecting the apartment after the tragedy told me the protocol for dealing with such cases. We had to make sure there were no other dangerous animals in the apartment, he explained. We checked every corner, every crevice. We found only common, non-venomous snakes. The same rescuer shared a statistic. There are 3 to 4 cases of exotic animals escaping in their city per year. Usually it's iguanas, pythons, sometimes parrots, he said. The poisonous snake case was the first in my 10 years of practice. The director of the reptile shelter where Mark's remaining snakes were turned over to told me about the challenges of adopting such animals. There are very few people capable of providing proper care for large snakes, she explained. And there are many people who want to take an exotic reptile out of curiosity. At the shelter, I was shown 2 pythons from Mark's collection, a king python and a tiger python. Large, beautiful snakes, each cost several $1,000s. Now they are waiting for new owners in standard terrariums, much more modest than the ones Mark built for them. A shelter volunteer who cared for Mark's snakes for the first few months told of an odd detail. All of his snakes were very calm, clearly used to humans, she said. Mark really knew how to handle them, which makes his death even more tragic. The zoo herpetologist who took Emerald in after the tragedy described the snake's condition to me. She was in excellent physical shape, well-fed, with no signs of stress or illness, he told me. Mark was indeed providing her with ideal conditions. Ironically, that's what allowed her to retain all her deadly qualities. In the zoo's new terrarium, Emerald behaves like a regular museum exhibit. Visitors take pictures next to the plaque, unaware that there is a killer behind the glass. Zoo staff know the story but prefer not to spread the word, so as not to scare the public and not to give the snake a bad reputation. Studying the forums of reptile lovers after Mark's death, I noticed an interesting pattern. The tragedy didn't deter enthusiasts. On the contrary, some took it as a challenge. Mark was careless, it won't happen to me, they wrote. Human self-confidence is amazingly resilient. One forum participant shared with me the philosophy of venom kippers. We don't play with death, we study it. Every day around a venomous snake is a lesson in respect for nature. Sounds beautiful, but the mortality statistics in their community say otherwise. A psychiatrist who specializes in impulse control disorders explained to me the mechanism of risk addiction. At first, a person experiences fear, then learns to control it, he said. Gradually, the fear dulls and the need for thrills grows. You need an increasing dose of adrenaline. In Mark's case, that dose became lethal. Perhaps the usual snakes no longer gave him enough excitement, and he decided on the mamba. And then, as he got used to it, he started to let his guard down. It's the classic trap of all extreme hobbies. The emergency locksmith who was fixing the heating in Mark's home the week before the tragedy told me of a strange conversation. I was working in his apartment and he kept talking about snakes, the man recalled. Showed pictures, told me which one lived where. When I saw the big terrarium in the bedroom, I asked him if it was scary to sleep next to it. And he said, "Fear is an illusion." That phrase explains a lot about Mark's psychology. He didn't just ignore danger. He philosophically denied its existence. For him, snakes were not a threat, but partners in some mystical dance. Reality proved less romantic. An exotic animal consultant with whom Mark had corresponded in recent months preserved their dialogue. Mark complained that his friends and colleagues didn't understand his hobby, considered him a weirdo. "They see only danger," he wrote. "I see the perfection of nature." There is a prophetic message in this correspondence, sent 3 weeks before his death. Sometimes I think Emerald looks at me as prey. I guess that's normal. A predator always evaluates others from that perspective. The counselor responded with a joke, not taking the words seriously. The owner of the terrarium equipment store where Mark was a regular customer told me about his latest purchase. A week before the tragedy, Mark had purchased a new ventilation system for his emerald terrarium. Said the snake was getting restless, probably because of the stuffiness, the salesman recalled. This detail piqued my interest. I contacted the engineer who had designed the climate control system for the terrarium. He explained that any change in the familiar environment could cause stress to the reptiles. The installation of the new ventilation may have been exactly what triggered the escape attempt. The electrician who wired the new system remembers Mark as a meticulous customer. Demanded that everything be perfect, the foreman recounted. He checked every wire, every connection. Said the snake's life depended on it. Didn't know that his own life depended on it. An upstairs neighbor told me about the sound she heard the night of the tragedy. Around midnight, there was some movement, creaking furniture, the woman recalled. I thought Mark was moving something heavy. Now I realize he was looking for a snake. These sounds paint a terrifying picture of the last hours of Mark's life. A methodical search for a deadly threat in his own apartment, in the dark, knowing that every wrong step could be his last. And yet, the inability to stop, because the alternative is even worse. The emergency animal capture service dispatcher on duty told me about the calls Mark tried to make that night. The answering machine recorded 3 attempts to call, he said. But the night service only works for animal attacks on people, not to find them. If Mark had gotten through, the specialists would have arrived in the morning. By then it would have been too late, but he might have waited for their help without risking searching for the snake himself. Life and death sometimes depend on little things like service schedules. A toxicologist at University Hospital showed me statistics on snake venom poisonings in the United States. There are about 8,000 cases reported each year, he said. But most are bites from wild snakes in the wild. Cases involving domestic venomous reptiles account for less than 1%. The same doctor explained to me why mamba venom is particularly dangerous. It contains neurotoxins that block the transmission of nerve impulses, he told me. The victim remains conscious but gradually loses control of his body. It's one of the most agonizing deaths in nature. Knowing this, one can imagine the last minutes of Mark's life. The realization of what was happening, the inability to change anything, the slow sinking into paralysis. Perhaps in these moments he regretted his passion, or perhaps he accepted death as the natural finale of his relationship with the reptilian world. The cleaning lady who was preparing the apartment for delivery to the new tenants told me about the items she had found. There was a note in the nightstand. "If anything happens to me, please don't kill my snakes," the woman recalled. He was more worried about them than himself. That note is the quintessential example of Mark's tragedy. A man who loved snakes so much he was willing to die for them, and in the end did indeed die. but not as a hero, but as a victim of his own naivety and overestimation of his ability to control nature.